So a book is a loaded gun in the house next door. Burn it. Hello, I'm Kate. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to another episode of Cooking with Classics. Today we're going to be discussing a general review of Fahrenheit 451, except this is actually the copy I made all of my notes in, but you know, it's fine, a general review. We'll also be talking about how writers can sort of disregard language purposely in order to make a more powerful story, and of course, censorship. Both within the context of the novel and also what happened to the book in our own very real history. Of course, all while baking. This time we're going to do some fire cupcakes. As in, I'm going to attempt to make them look like fire with like the frosting in order to honor Guy Montag, not that I think the actual cupcakes will be like so good that they're fire. I'm sorry. I already have all of my ingredients lined up and ready. Let's turn on the oven and get to it. But first up, let's go ahead and put some respect on Mr. Ray Bradbury's name and put you somewhere else. Okay, to start, Ray Bradbury wrote over 20 novels and 600 something short stories, which is crazy. You can tell I've taken a little bit of a break by how quickly that went off. And according to Wikipedia, he actually sold over 8 million copies of his various books. 8 million. And then I need a cup of water and my 3 large eggs. He also often consulted on TV scripts and even won an Emmy for one of his screenplays. But an Emmy is just one of the many awards or accolades that he's received. Some of my personal favorites include having a NASA rover Curiosity landing site on Mars named after him, as well as being the 10th Grandmaster of the Science Fiction Writers of America, the SFWA, and even having an asteroid named after him. How freaking cool. He also lived to be the age of 91, and up until 2009, just 3 years before he passed away, he frequented science fiction conventions, and his headstone reads, author of Fahrenheit 451. Yeah. So I think that means it's a good time to move on to the book. And also the mixing of the cake. What am I supposed to cook this on? I had so much about this book that I really loved, but I cannot say that that case is true for the first 30 or so pages. I found the first 30 pages so hard to get through, and it was so fun this time. I actually convinced both of my parents to kind of join me in a pseudo book club, and they agreed. Those first 30 pages. Bradbury uses so many metaphors that I wasn't sure what was actually happening and what was sort of maybe happening, especially since this world is set in a sort of near future. For example, I have a note that says, what the fuck is up with this paragraph? But LOL at the next one. Montag shook his head. He looked at a blank wall. The girl's face was there, really quite beautiful in memory, astonishing in fact. She had a very thin face, like the dial of a small clock seen faintly in a dark room in the middle of a night when you waken to see the time and see the clock telling you the hour and the minute and the second, with a white silence and a glowing all certainty in knowing what it had to tell of the night passing swiftly on toward further darkness, but moving also toward a new sun. Editing Kate here. I realize that this doesn't seem as confusing when out of context, so let me say that a single page before this that we have a character, Clarice, saying how she never watches the parlor walls, and combined with the other near future tech that's often mentioned in the first few pages, I was just confused if the walls he was talking about were parlor walls or, you know, actual walls, but we got lost in the metaphor. This happens repeatedly in the first 30 pages or so. That was the point I was attempting to make also. Look at that face. It's so funny to see what tripped me up early on in the book ended up being some of my kind of favorite thing reading later in the book. But God, those first 30 pages. This sort of near future is an interesting setting because according to some sources, that near future was supposed to be 1999. And yet the same feeling of near future was true even for me reading it in 2020. The technology doesn't seem outdated. It all still feels like a time that's yet to come, which is an impressive feat, but also kind of scary within the context of the novel. A la what most dystopian books are striving for, I guess. So anyways, if y'all have read the book, I'd be so curious to hear what you thought if the first 30 pages sort of tripped you up also. Regardless, I either got used to it or Bradbury let up on the unrelenting metaphors. I think it was some kind of combination because I freaking loved the rest of this book. But since we are on the topic of writing style, I want to talk specifically about the way Ray Bradbury uses and abuses the language to get his point across. And I'm gonna try and set you up here as we make the frosting next. My confession though is I'm not like the best at dyeing things or baking in general. For those of you who have seen other episodes of this, you are probably aware. But I'm always a little bit nervous when I'm attempting to dye things. So I have, lots of options. Oh, I'm like Wolverine almost, kind of, not really. I think this use and abuse of the English language was what made this book such a fun read for me and what really makes it stand out to me, just because I love dystopian novels in general, so this kind of like took it above and beyond my expectations. Let me point out a few of my favorites. For instance, on page 45, when it was all over, he felt like a man who had been thrown from a cliff, whirled in a centrifuge, and spat out over a waterfall that fell and fell into emptiness and never quite touched bottom. Never quite, no, not quite touched bottom, and you fell so fast you didn't touch the sides either, never quite touched anything. The thunder faded, the music died. You just need to see all of the dashes and the ellipses, and it is crazy. But in the moment, it's the perfect intensity that you need for it all to kind of come crashing down at the same time that the thunder fades and the music dies. Again, genuinely love the writing switch up. A shotgun blast went off in his leg every time he put it down, and he thought, you're a fool, a damn fool, an awful fool, an awful idiot, a damn idiot, and a fool, a damn fool. Look at the mess and where's the mop? Look at the mess and what do? Pride, damn it, and temper, and you've junked it all. At the very start, you vomit on everyone and on yourself. But everything at once, but everything one on top of another. Beatty, the women, Mildred, Clarice, everything. No excuse though, no excuse. A fool, a damn fool. Go give yourself up. I mean, damn, not a damn fool. Just damn. Come on, time to go clunk. Yay. And then some butter at room temperature, which means it's gonna get all over my hands. I'm gonna let these cool and then read you another example. And while none of it will be me when it goes in, after a while it'll all gather together inside and it'll be me. Look at the world out there, my God, look at it out there, outside me, out there, beyond my face, and the only way to really touch it is to put it where it's finally me, where it's in the blood, where it pumps around 1,000 times, 10,000 a day. I get hold of it so it'll never run off. I'll hold on to the world tight someday. I've got one finger on it now. That's a beginning. And then once again, we're kind of immediately brought down more to earth almost with the wind died, and we're back to like the typical sort of storytelling. I'm thinking now the only difference between this and kind of page 10 was that I wasn't yet connected to any of the characters, so it was very confusing when we almost switched it up so much. And also again, I'm just telling you, there's something about those 30 pages, okay? But after that, great. Okay. In general, I want a whole lot more of this in books. It felt like I was almost playing while I was reading. It was just so fun. Another interesting thing for me was how jam-packed this book was with like issues that are only kind of touched on in a fleeting sort of way. Because obviously the main point of the book, or like the social dialogue that it's trying to bring about, is censorship, and then also this sort of like TV and like simpler entertainment taking over our lives and whatever. You're sort of kind of left with a whiplash feeling with how quickly they're stated, and you move on and you're like, that could have been a whole point of a book in itself, a whole point of a dystopian novel in itself. For example, page 92, this is a conversation between Faber and Montag, and Montag saying, I'm not thinking, I'm just doing like I'm told, like always. You said get the money and I got it. I didn't really think of it myself. When do I start working these out on my own? And Faber replies, you've started already by saying what you just said. And then we talk a little bit about faith, but it's kind of like this idea that the thought itself is the first step to making these kind of changes. Questioning things is step one. So though we're not always on the other steps to either like self-actualization or any sort of problem and fixing it, just questioning it in itself is the beginning. Admittedly, the book does deal with this because obviously Montag does have to question things, but just the way it's stated in the book, I love it so much. But to talk about something that's sort of touched on and then kind of glossed over, we're gonna go to page 115 when Montag is quoted as saying, this is happening to me. And Beatty replies, what a dreadful surprise, for everyone nowadays knows absolutely is certain that nothing will ever happen to me. Others die, I go on. And this is actually touched on again on page 132 with the quote, "God, isn't it funny," said the old man. "It seems so remote because we have our own troubles." There's also on page 149 when this government is kind of on the hunt for Montag and they're putting on a show more than anything. And then, spoiler alert, they kill a guy that's not Montag in order to give the people that are watching at home this kind of feeling of conclusion. Yay, the government did it. Yay, we've won. The awful person Montag has been killed. And yet, no, and that just feels so relevant today, where it's more the hype of the media rather than the actual truth of any given situation. But even that is only touched on in this sort of limited way rather than the whole point of the novel being this thing. Finally, I just love this line on page 104. I'm actually thinking of writing it somewhere, but within the context it's even saying, I know, you're afraid of making mistakes. Don't be. Mistakes can be profited by. And then it goes into a little bit more depth on that, but just mistakes can be profited by. Man. Also, I feel like I should check the cake now. Oh, this is actually going to be cake balls at the end of the day. Now we're at the scary part where I have to mix in the color to the frosting. Yeah. We can talk about censorship after I completely butcher the coloring process. I feel like these are just gonna need like one drop, right? Because they're so small, right? Okay, that was more than one. What did I just say, self? This actually looks a little bit more orange in person. This yellow is, you know, next to each other. I think it could work. And then we have here a Pepto-Bismol pink. It'll be a very cute fire rather than a scary fire cupcake. Beautiful, truly, really. So, censorship, right? Sure. So it's interesting to me because Fahrenheit 451 is such a huge part of like bookish lore or the bookish community, especially during events like Banned Book Week or Banned Book Month. I thought that I knew what Fahrenheit 451 dealt with without ever having really read it, and yet somehow, even though I knew it was about censorship, I was so wrong. I thought it was going to be slightly more 1984-esque. I had no idea the way that Bradbury was going to sort of take it, the way that we'd created these firefighters in his novel, and how their even role came to be was from the people, was from us, was from our fear of the other and our hatred of the other and some amount of not wanting to offend the other, like a weird amalgamation of all that. At least the way Beatty, the character, puts it. Where's my book? Donde está mi libro? Donde? I had it sitting like this. Here we go. On page 57 going to 58. The bigger your market, Montag, the less you handle controversy. Remember that. All the minor minorities with their navels to be kept clean. Authors full of evil thoughts, lock up your typewriters. They did. Magazines became a nice blend of vanilla tapioca. Books, so the damn snobbish critics said, were dishwater. No wonder books stopped selling, the critics said. But the public, knowing what it wanted, spinning happily, let the comic books survive. And the three-dimensional sex magazines, of course. There you have it, Montag. It didn't come from the government down. There was no dictum, no declaration, no censorship to start with, no. Technology, mass exploitation, and minority pressure carried the trick, thank God. Today, thanks to them, you could stay happy all the time. And then we go on to learn more about the history of the firefighters and how, you know, the near future is that houses can't be burned down the same way. But talking of, we must all be alike. Not everyone born free and equal as the Constitution says, but everyone made equal. Each man the image of every other. Then all are happy, for there are no mountains to make them coward to judge themselves against. So a book is a loaded gun in the house next door. Burn it. I had no idea to expect that, which I think is so interesting, and this is actually mirrored in the coda of the book. The novel has both an afterword and a coda, where the book was treated this way by its own publisher, with new copies taking out swear words, taking out certain ideologies, and so on and so forth. But speaking of the coda, Bradbury actually doubles down on his philosophy that he expresses throughout the book, where he mentions that he's been asked if he'd write it again, would he include more women, and he says no. Okay, fire it is. It's gonna fire. I will try this a couple different ways. Way one is squeezing down all of them at once. Oh no, that does not look like a fire to me. Maybe if I do it like levels, pink will go first, then orange. Why does this just more look like rainbow poop? And then a little bit of yellow. Look, it's a fire. Fire or rainbow poop, you decide. Wow, petition for me to be on Netflix has nailed it. Look at all of that fire. I'm gonna have to let my fellow readers and judges try these in a bit, but I have a few more things I want to talk about first. Now, as a writer myself, I did find it interesting that both in the coda and the afterword, Bradbury kind of mentions how it would be censoring his former self, his younger self, if he were to change anything in this book, and yet at least the first movie adaptation and the play that Ray Bradbury wrote himself regarding some of these characters, Clarice still lives. It's just an interesting twist, I think, that an outside perspective who'd read the book and loved it and wanted to make a movie of it, and then the author himself decided that if he were theoretically to do another version of it, he would not have killed off this character, or at least not in the same way. Now, one of the other things I want to talk about before mentioning the very end of the book is that I had no idea what was going to happen throughout this novel. I felt like I was on a wild ride where almost anything could happen until the last 30 pages or so. Like, we did sort of narrow down, but but did we? This book is divided into sections, and as I was reading the first section, I was so sure what I thought was going to happen in the second. So the first is called The Hearth and the Salamander. I made a note for part 2, The Seam in the Sand, where I said part 1 is like man versus himself, realizations that Montag is having, and then we were going to transition into like man versus the system, or man versus the machine, man versus society, whatever you want to say. But then that's not really exactly what we got, or at least not in the way I thought. Where is my note? Where is my note? Part 2 is coming up with a plan and a problem with the plan, or a wrinkle, and then I thought part 3 would be kind of like figuring it out toward the end of the wrinkle, but the figuring it out was so different than I expected. And did we figure it out? Now, some things weren't quite a mystery to me. Like, I was so certain that Beatty was going to be bad, but I had no idea of the rich sort of backstory to the character that I was going to get. I could not have predicted that at all. Whereas my dad, when he was reading it, wasn't sure that Beatty was going to be bad until we saw what happened to Beatty's kind of demise. In fact, the parts where Beatty just got to wax on about things around the middle of the book, I actually really loved, because at that point, the middle of the book, I was starved for wanting to know so much that having the character just kind of outright say it helped me. I liked it, and I think it also really worked as a way to build up Beatty's character. But all that being said, in typical dystopian novels, I know what's kind of gonna happen. I may not know exactly, I may not know at every single turn, I may not know all of the twists, but there feels like a very beginning, middle, end, and it feels like a kind of usual structure. To me, this did not follow the structure I was expecting at all, and I loved it. Excusing those first 30 pages and a weird like 10-page chunk towards the end of the novel where my mom actually said she got so bored, but you know, it was a little bit less interesting, but then we quickly moved to the end and I was back in it. It was so entertaining, it was so good, and I think it's become one of my favorite classic novels that I've read, especially given the ending, because this book actually made me feel so hopeful. On page 163, and I'm not gonna really spoil it, but I want to talk about this sort of phoenix concept. I'm not gonna really spoil it, as I talked about spoilers throughout. It's fine. In quotes. There was a silly damn bird called a phoenix back before Christ. Every few hundred years he built a pyre and burnt himself up. He must have been first cousin to man. But every time he burnt himself up, he sprang out of the ashes, he got himself born all over again, and it looks like we're doing the same thing over and over, but we've got one damn thing the phoenix never had. We know the damn silly thing we just did. We know all the damn silly things we've done for 1,000 years, and as long as we know that and always have it around where we can see it, someday we'll stop making the goddamn funeral pyres and jumping in the middle of them. We pick up a few more people that remember every generation. And I think that kind of explains the last 5 pages or so of the novel, but this idea that man is like a phoenix, and the fact that we have books and we can share this history, these history are in our words, or in the words that Granger and Montag and crew have memorized from the books that they saw, that someday the war will stop. Someday we will figure it out and we will stop throwing ourselves on the pyres. And that left me more hopeful than I thought for such a kind of bleak book, if you think about it. Because I mean, poor Clarice, poor Mildred, poor Faber, the poor firefighters, and poor Montag himself. They went frickin' through it. But ultimately, I was left feeling hopeful rather than beaten down, which I think is so impressive. Hopefully my cupcakes also taste impressive. Time to see if my reading buddies agree. I'm gonna call them out and I'm gonna make them choose which one of these looks like a freaking fire. None. The answer's none. Rude. What do you think?
I'm gonna go with that one.
Oh, okay. I called that one rainbow poop.
That one looks more like poop.
Wow, thank you. Would you like to try one? I need you to tell me if it actually tastes good.
Okay.
So,
which one you want me to get?
well, you can take the heart one.
I'll take the heart one.
Good?
Good, I like it. It's mine?
Yep, that's yours. Thank you. Cake's good.
It's good? The whole thing's good.
I always take the bottom. I like to leave my little frosting. It tastes great. I can't make anything that looks good, but it tastes great. She's like, true.
I'm gonna say that one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There you go. That answers that. But all right, I am about to make some more frosting and create some cake bowls. So please do comment down below. Let me know what you think of Fahrenheit 451. Let me know if you've read anything by Ray Bradbury before. And let me know what you think about censorship generally, but also in the banning of books. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see y'all very soon with a new video. Bye. Ooh. Both within the context of the novel. What? Apology upon